Today's mindful moment, packed with insights but designed to fit into your busy life. One deep dive at a time. Ever feel like the president's just kind of the face of a way bigger operation? Like there's this whole hidden world pulling strings and making decisions.
It's true.
That's what we're diving into today. White House Chiefs of Staff.
The people who actually make the presidency tick.
Exactly.
And they don't always get the credit.
Or the blame, for that matter.
Right.
Our source material for this deep dive is Chris Whipple's The Gatekeepers.
It's like a tell-all about the people behind the most powerful people.
Juicy anecdotes, surprising failures, and a whole lot of what-ifs.
Definitely some head-spinning moments in there.
Okay, so where do we even begin with this?
Well, it all starts with Eisenhower.
Oh, interesting.
He saw firsthand the chaos that can happen without a strong gatekeeper.
Right.
Especially after that whole Bay of Pigs fiasco during Kennedy's time.
Makes sense. He wouldn't want to be caught off guard like that.
Exactly. So Eisenhower was really adamant that no president should be blindsided.
By, like, unvetted information and all that. So, enter Sherman Adams, the OG Chief of Staff.
Yeah, he had basically wrote the playbook for the role.
And it's become essential to every presidency since then.
Right. Eisenhower, with his military background, he really valued order and discipline.
Makes sense.
And Adams, he became the enforcer, you know?
Oh, I see. Like the filter.
Yeah, he made sure only the most crucial stuff reached the president.
So what were, like, the core functions he set up?
Well, managing the president's time was a big one.
Time is precious.
And controlling access to the president, too.
Keeping the riffraff out.
And then just generally coordinating the flow of information.
So it sounds like the chief of staff's kind of like the conductor of an orchestra.
I like that analogy.
Making sure all the different sections are playing in harmony.
Exactly.
But what happens when that conductor gets a little too powerful?
That's a good question.
That's what I think of with the Nixon administration.
Yeah, Nixon was all about having a strong chief of staff.
After seeing how it worked for Eisenhower, I guess.
Right, so he chose H.R. Haldeman, who was known for his loyalty.
And control, I've heard.
Oh, yeah, meticulous control.
But wasn't that part of what led to Nixon's downfall during Watergate?
Well, it's complicated, but yeah, that control definitely played a role.
So Haldeman was like the ultimate yes man then?
Pretty much, yeah.
Controlling everything going in and out of the Oval Office?
To a fault, sometimes.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good.
It raises a big question, you know?
What's that?
Where does loyalty end and enabling begin?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It's a tightrope walk for any chief of staff.
The book really gets into the dark side of Haldeman's influence.
Yeah, the enemies list, the Watergate cover-up, it's all pretty damning.
It's a cautionary tale for sure.
Shows what can happen when power goes unchecked in that position.
Definitely highlights the need for ethical boundaries.
And for a chief of staff who's willing to challenge the president.
And when it's hard.
Absolutely.
And then things shift dramatically with Gerald Ford.
Oh, yeah, he inherited a mess.
After Nixon resigned, talk about needing a steady hand.
That's where Rumsfeld and Cheney come in.
They were pretty shrewd political operators, right?
Yeah, they knew how to work the system.
And they understood the need to restore trust after Watergate.
Exactly. Public trust was shattered.
So didn't Ford initially want to distance himself from Nixon's style?
He did. He actually rejected Rumsfeld's advice about a structured system.
Really?
Yeah, Ford wanted a clean break, so he went with this spokes of the wheel style. That meant multiple advisors had direct access to him.
Sounds like that could lead to chaos.
Oh, it did, especially with the pardon of Nixon.
Yeah, that was controversial.
It was supposed to help the nation move on, but it backfired.
People thought he was beholden to Nixon.
Exactly the opposite of what he wanted.
It's like they focused too much on damage control.
And missed the bigger political picture.
It shows how tricky that balance is for a chief of staff.
Between loyalty and awareness of the political landscape.
Sometimes protecting the president means giving tough advice.
Yeah, even if they don't want to hear it.
Okay, so then we have Jimmy Carter.
A brilliant guy.
But maybe not the most politically savvy.
Right. And he actually resisted having a strong chief of staff at first.
Why is that?
He wanted to be a hands-on leader, thought he could manage everything himself.
Whoa, that's ambitious.
It was a bit much, though.
What happened?
Chaos, basically.
Well,
His decentralized structure led to confusion, inefficiency, infighting.
yes.
He was constantly pulled in different directions.
So it's like herding cats.
Exactly.
Everyone with their own agenda, no one to bring it all together.
Right, and it wasn't until later when he appointed Jack Watson as chief of staff.
That things settled down.
Yeah, but by then a lot of damage was already done.
So even a brilliant mind needs a good right hand.
Absolutely. It shows how essential the chief of staff role is.
It's about knowing your limitations, delegating effectively.
And having someone you trust to manage things.
A team effort, not a solo act.
Exactly.
Which brings us to Ronald Reagan.
The great communicator.
But he also relied heavily on his team.
Right. He did. He had his famous Troika leadership style.
Right, with James Baker as chief of staff, Ed Meese as counselor, and Michael Deaver as deputy chief of staff.
It was an interesting experiment in shared leadership.
But wasn't it always smooth sailing?
Not really. Baker ended up being the real power broker.
Why him?
Well, he was politically savvy and good at managing egos.
Important in that kind of setup.
Yeah, and he knew how to build consensus and create a decision-making process.
Which was crucial with Reagan.
Exactly.
But Deaver and Meese weren't just sitting around, were they?
No, they both had their own agendas.
And they weren't afraid to go around Baker to get what they wanted.
Right, which caused some friction.
And led to some big mistakes.
Like the Iran-Contra scandal.
Right, that was a huge blow to Reagan.
It shows what can happen when there's a lack of discipline and a clear chain of command.
And it happened after Baker left and Don Regan took over.
Which is pretty telling.
So even with a president like Reagan, that chief of staff role is crucial.
To keep things running smoothly and prevent those big blunders.
It's about anticipating problems, managing personalities, and always thinking ahead.
Exactly. It's not just about managing a schedule or controlling access.
It's a much bigger picture.
It's about being strategic, managing crises, and understanding politics.
All rolled into one.
Yeah, it takes a special kind of person.
With a lot of skills and maybe a bit of luck.
Definitely.
So as we move into the Bush dynasty, how did this role evolve even further?
Well, George H.W. Bush had seen it all firsthand as Reagan's VP.
He knew the importance of a strong chief of staff?
Absolutely. And he came in with a clear idea of how he wanted things to run.
So who did he pick?
John Sununu.
I've heard of him. Wasn't he a bit controversial?
He was brilliant, but could be abrasive.
So was that ultimately good or bad for Bush?
He got things done. No question about that.
Effective then.
A master of policy and negotiation, but that abrasive style rubbed people the wrong way.
Including people in Congress.
And even his own staff.
So there's that tension again.
Between being effective and being likable.
Can you be too good at your job if you make enemies along the way?
That's a tough question.
Sununu's story is a reminder that even brilliant people need diplomacy.
And an understanding of how to work with others.
And his downfall with those scandals over government transportation.
It highlights the importance of integrity in that role.
Absolutely. You're in a position of power and trust.
Any hint of wrongdoing can be disastrous.
Not just for you, but for the whole administration.
Exactly.
So then we have Sam Skinner, who took over for Sununu.
He was brought in to calm things down.
But he faced some tough challenges.
The economy was struggling. Bush's approval ratings were tanking.
And the '92 election was looming.
He was dealt a difficult hand.
So was he up to the task?
He was competent and well-liked, but he lacked the political instincts.
And maybe the force of personality.
Yeah, he struggled to manage the competing factions in the White House.
And to craft a clear message for the administration.
It was a case of right person, wrong time.
So as the election got closer, Bush realized he needed a heavy hitter.
Someone who could pull off a miracle.
And that's when James Baker came back.
The master of politics.
He'd already served as chief of staff and Treasury Secretary under Reagan.
Bush trusted him completely.
But even with all of Baker's experience, it wasn't enough.
It shows that sometimes the political headwinds are just too strong.
Even with the best team, events can take on a life of their own.
It's a humbling thought.
And with Clinton's victory, we enter a new era.
A new generation of leaders, a new set of challenges.
Exactly. Bill Clinton brought a different style to the White House.
He was charismatic, policy-driven.
But also prone to distractions, maybe lacks some discipline.
That's where Mac McLarty, his first chief of staff, comes in.
McLarty was a close friend of Clinton's, a successful businessman.
Right.
But was that the right background for this job?
Well, he was good at building relationships and negotiating.
Important skills.
But the Clinton White House was a whirlwind.
Lots of competing factions.
And Clinton himself was pulling in different directions.
So McLarty had his work cut out for him.
He was maybe too nice for the job, struggled to manage the chaos.
Sounds like he was more at home in a boardroom
than in the West Wing.
So what were the consequences of that?
The administration stumbled out of the gate.
Not a good start.
There was a lack of discipline, a lack of focus.
In a sense that Clinton was overwhelmed?
McLarty just wasn't willing to say no to him.
Which is crucial for a chief of staff.
Absolutely.
So again, we see that loyalty can conflict with what's best for the presidency.
It's about setting boundaries, making tough calls.
Even if it means risking a friendship.
Right.
And Clinton recognized that McClarty wasn't the right fit.
He replaced him with Leon Panetta,
who had a very different reputation.
He was tough but respected.
And he'd been Clinton's budget director.
So he knew how to handle things.
How did he transform the Clinton White House?
He brought order and discipline.
Much needed.
He established clear lines of authority, streamlined decision-making.
And most importantly,
he wasn't afraid to stand up to Clinton.
That takes courage.
He knew he had to create a firewall between Clinton and the demands of the job.
Even if it meant making himself the bad guy.
Exactly.
So what made Panetta so effective?
Well, he was organized, a skilled manager.
But more than that.
He understood policy. He understood Washington.
He knew how to play the game.
He knew how to build consensus, work with Congress, anticipate problems.
So he was more than just a gatekeeper.
He was a strategist, a problem solver, a political tactician.
All in one.
Yeah, he had a big impact on Clinton's presidency.
Laid the groundwork for a successful second term.
A time of stability and economic prosperity.
But even with Panetta at the helm, there was still controversy.
That's politics for you.
Next time we'll dive into the Lewinsky scandal, the impeachment crisis.
And how the chief of staff role evolved in the 21st century.
From Bush to Obama and beyond.
It's a fascinating journey.
Stay tuned.
Picking up where we left off with the Clinton White House.
Right, they faced a real crisis with the Lewinsky scandal.
A true test of leadership and damage control.
It's hard to imagine being in that pressure cooker.
Absolutely.
How did Erskine Bowles, who took over from Panetta, even handle that?
Well, it really affected him deeply, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, I can see that.
His loyalty to Clinton was tested.
Right.
But he also had to focus on keeping the government running.
Amidst all the chaos.
Exactly. It's a prime example of how personal and political collide in this role.
It's like a constant balancing act.
Trying to navigate the scandal while also advancing Clinton's agenda.
So how did he do it?
He adopted a containment strategy, isolating the scandal.
To certain teams, I imagine.
Right, so he could focus on the bigger picture policy issues.
So it's like the president's actions created this crisis.
But the work of governing still had to go on.
Shows the chief of staff's role as a protector.
Shielding the president from distractions.
While also dealing with the fallout.
Exactly.
Then towards the end of Clinton's term, you have John Podesta taking over.
As his fourth and final chief of staff.
He and Clinton went way back.
To their activist days.
What kind of dynamic did that bring to the White House?
Well, Podesta was a policy wonk.
Right.
And he understood politics.
Makes sense.
And Clinton really trusted him.
So that allowed him to be more assertive.
Yeah, in managing the president and the agenda.
But he also came in after the impeachment trial.
A very divisive time.
How did that impact his tenure?
It was a tough environment, for sure.
I bet.
He focused on legacy building.
Trying to solidify Clinton's achievements.
Despite all the criticism.
And he also had to manage that transition to the new administration.
After a very close election.
Right,
A lot on his plate.
Sounds like a high-wire act.
Keeping things moving while preparing for the inevitable change.
Then we have the 2000 election.
And the start of the George W. Bush presidency.
A whole new set of challenges.
Absolutely.
That election itself was so dramatic.
Coming down to those few votes in Florida.
How did that impact Bush's choice of chief of staff?
Well, he learned from his father.
About the importance of a strong chief of staff.
Right. And he'd also seen the chaos of the Clinton years.
So he wanted someone experienced and steady.
Exactly. He chose Andy Card.
I remember him. He was there on 9/11.
It was Card who told Bush about the attacks.
During that school visit.
Talk about a trial by fire.
It's crazy how that moment changed everything.
For Bush, for the administration, for the world.
What kind of impact did that have on Card?
It was an immense burden, managing Bush's response, coordinating with
Guiding the nation through all that uncertainty and fear.
It was a lot to handle.
And then there's the Iraq War.
Another defining moment for Bush.
How did that decision affect the dynamic between Bush and Card?
It was a very controversial war.
It put a lot of pressure on everyone.
Card had to manage the war itself, the political fallout, the public scrutiny.
A lot of moving parts.
And then you have Dick Cheney in the mix.
The vice president, who'd been Ford's chief of staff.
He had a lot of influence on Bush.
How did that play out?
Cheney was much more involved than most VPs.
Especially on national security.
Right, and that sometimes created tension with others, including Card.
It's a good reminder that the chief of staff isn't the only voice in the president's ear.
There are always competing agendas and relationships to navigate.
Then we come to Barack Obama.
our first African-American president.
Facing an economic crisis and 2 wars.
He chose Rahm Emanuel as his chief of staff.
Known for his tough, no-nonsense approach,
He got things done.
was that style effective in the Obama White House?
It certainly helped push through Obama's agenda.
Especially in those first 2 years.
The financial crisis, the Affordable Care Act, a lot of ambitious policies.
But wasn't there some pushback against his style?
Some people found him abrasive, yes.
Did that become a liability?
It depends on who you ask.
Some say he alienated potential allies.
Made it harder to build consensus?
Others say his tough approach was necessary.
To achieve Obama's goals in such a polarized environment.
It shows how different leadership styles can be effective.
Depending on the situation and the personalities involved.
So what happened when Emanuel left to become mayor of Chicago?
Obama chose Bill Daley.
A more low-key figure from the business world.
A different set of skills, a different approach.
Did that work?
Daley struggled to adapt to the West Wing.
It's a different beast.
And he clashed with some of Obama's longtime advisors.
So it wasn't a great fit.
In the end, he was replaced by Jack Lew.
Who'd been Obama's budget director.
Right.
So Obama went through a few different chiefs of staff.
Each with their own strengths and weaknesses.
What was he looking for in that role?
For his second term, he chose Dennis McDonough.
A longtime foreign policy advisor.
Known for being smart, detail-oriented, good at building consensus.
So a shift from Emanuel's more aggressive style.
More thoughtful and deliberate.
McDonough was more of a behind-the-scenes guy.
He got things done quietly.
But he was involved in some major decisions.
The bin Laden raid, the Iran deal, the Paris Agreement.
Wow, high-stakes stuff.
He was a key player.
So the chief of staff role has evolved.
But certain qualities remain essential.
They need to manage the chaos, filter the noise, support the president.
Exactly.
What else stands out to you about this role? Yeah, it really seems like each president needs a different kind of chief of staff.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all position.
So after going through the gatekeepers, what insights stood out to you? Like what makes a truly effective chief of staff?
Well, first off, they got to be organized.
Yeah, the White House is a chaotic place.
So many demands on the president's time.
The chief has to create order out of that chaos.
Exactly. So the president can focus on what matters most.
Like that conductor analogy again.
Keeping the orchestra in tune.
Right. And they have to be great communicators, too.
They're the voice of the president sometimes.
To Congress, the media, everyone.
So they need to build relationships and be good negotiators.
And we saw how important it is to say no to the president.
Oh, definitely.
Even when it's tough.
It's about protecting them.
From bad decisions, impulsive moves.
It takes real loyalty, but also courage.
And a deep understanding of how politics works.
It's like being a guardian, you know?
Protecting the president from distractions and pitfalls.
And helping them navigate a really complex job.
Exactly.
And they need to be strategic thinkers, too.
Always anticipating what's coming next.
Thinking 10 steps ahead, finding solutions before problems blow up.
It's a high-stakes game.
And the chief of staff's choices can have huge consequences.
For the president, the country, even the world.
That's what makes it so fascinating.
This power behind the scenes, shaping events without most people even knowing.
It's true.
So it brings us back to that question Whipple poses.
Does the chief of staff actually have more power than the vice president?
It's a tough one.
It really depends.
On the people, the administration, the challenges they face.
Sometimes the VP takes a more prominent role.
Like Cheney under Bush.
But sometimes the chief is the real power behind the throne.
Controlling access, shaping policy, whispering in the president's ear.
Power isn't always about titles.
It's about relationships, trust, influence.
Working behind the scenes to get things done.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into White House chiefs of staff, what's the one big takeaway you'd leave our listeners with?
I'd say remember that the chief isn't just a gatekeeper.
Or a scheduler.
They're a strategic partner to the president.
A confidant.
A key player in how a presidency unfolds.
It's a role that demands so much.
Skill, temperament, good judgment.
And the president's choice of chief of staff can have a huge impact.
On their administration, on the nation, on the world.
That's why this deep dive has been so fascinating.
It's a look behind the curtain of power.
Seeing how decisions are made at the highest level.
If you want to learn more, definitely check out The Gatekeepers.
It's a great read that will change how you think about the presidency.
Absolutely.
And that's it for our deep dive this week.
Thanks for joining us.
Be sure to subscribe to the deep dive for more fascinating explorations.
We'll be back soon with another topic that'll make you think differently about the world.
Until then, keep learning. So if you haven't already,
pick up a copy.
We have a link in the show notes.
And tell us what you think.